happening now. We want to welcome our viewers from across the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good morning, good day, good evening. This is EdTech Situation Room, episode number 275 on December 7th, 2022. My name is Jason Neiffer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Montana Digital Academy, which is Montana State Virtual School located on the beautiful University of Montana campus. Not right here, because I'm elsewhere in Montana tonight, but in Missoula, Montana. And joining me tonight, as always, good evening, Dr. Wesley Fryer. How are you tonight, sir?
Good evening, Jason. I am well, and I am excited to join because it's almost been a month since we have been online, and a lot has happened in personal lives as well as the tech world. So we only have four weeks of articles to talk about, but we actually didn't get quite as crazy with the links tonight. So, but I think the rumor is we might talk about some AI tonight. That's just what I heard. So
yeah, totally.
what
Well,
are we going to do here?
Well, we collected some links for this week. We tend to comb the technology media looking for things that we think might be interesting to schools and education and talk about them here in our podcast. You can get these links at the EdTech Situation Room webpage, www.edtechsr.com/links, where we have a Google document that really documents every link we've ever talked about on the show. And in fact, we've had to split into two because Google Docs was starting to choke on the sheer number of links we had shared in that document. But tonight, we have several interesting topics to talk about, including artificial intelligence, a lot going on in that world tonight, Twitter and Mastodon, some app news, some interesting connectivity news, some virtual voice assistants news, or individualized personal assistants, depending on how you want to call them. A little bit of Apple news here and there, some social media news, journalism and polarization, culture news, space news, security news, and of course, we'll end tonight's festivities with our so-called Geek of the Week. Dr. Fryer, lots to talk about tonight. Is there anything in particular you want to focus on before we jump into some of the stickier stuff?
I think let's talk a little Mastodon. I just tweeted the first link out on Mastodon for a live show. So
that's a big something.
Yeah, for the record, everyone, it's Neiffer at mastodon.cloud, and it is W Fryer at mastodon.cloud. I didn't realize you were on the same server. So
nice.
Interesting. So all right. So I put we need to talk about the Twitter mess a little bit. I'll defer for that article for you. I'm going to go to PC World on November 30th, how Mastodon and the Fediverse put social networks in the people's hands. So I signed up for Mastodon back in 2017, and Miguel Gulen laughed at me. Let's just say that for the record. There were a lot of people laughing. Isn't this weird? My hand is doing weird things. I'm using my fancy Wi-Fi XSplit VCam here. Anyway, it was just sort of an experiment. As we've talked about on the show before, I mean, I wasn't excited when Google came out with Google Plus, thinking, "Oh, great, here's another social network that we need to build." But I was very intrigued by the fact that Mastodon was open source and the fact that it was community managed, and it had this potential of not being a centrally managed social network. So this article by PC World basically, goes through how the troubles that Twitter has been having as a result of Elon Musk's purchase and then the firing of so many people. I mean, we haven't seen Twitter go down, to my knowledge, and we haven't seen it implode, but we don't have these articles in the show notes currently, but there has been some research showing that the amount of hate speech and the amount of content that is problematic, has really exploded. But one of the things which might be a gift, and I guess I can just even say from a personal standpoint, the push that I have had because of concerns over Twitter's potential demise and the importance that Twitter has played in my own information consumption and filtering and just life, because we live with information, and the ways in which we choose to filter it and to take it in, these are important skills, and it's just an important part of how we're aware of what's going on. It's really given me a push, and it's given, I think, thousands of other people a push to really move into Mastodon and see is this an environment that can work? And I am happy to report that it feels a lot like early days of Web 2.0, kind of in the mid 2000s. It is more of an early adopter crowd that's using Mastodon, but I've had some fantastic interactions, not only with some familiar, names and faces as far as people that I have been following and connected with on Twitter, but also one that I might talk about a little bit later with respect to AI and AI generated art, with an author, and some great back and forth, and it's just been amazing. So anyway, Mastodon, it's a thing. It's a federated open source platform, much like email, which is standards based, and anybody can run their own email server. Anybody can run their own Mastodon server. But it's possible to interoperate just like we do with email. You don't have to be on Gmail. You don't all have to be on AOL, in order to exchange electronic messages. Similarly with Mastodon, you can be on whatever instance that you want, and you can interoperate and be able to see. But it is a true chronological feed. It is not algorithmically massaged by some kind of opaque algorithm that overlords at Facebook or Twitter or whatever, overlords from Silicon Valley, let's say, have crafted. So any thoughts, Dr. Neiffer, on your formative Mastodon experiences and just this phenomenon of what's happening because of the Twitter current events?
Yeah, and I would also go back to one of your earlier comments too, to talk about that. I mean, the reality is that Twitter hasn't gone down, and that was what I think was being kind of cheered for, but by those that don't like the way Mr. Musk has kind of taken over that platform. But the bottom line is that I don't think the experience of Twitter being up or down is really the problem. I think it's a bigger issue. I mean, I don't think I would run a company that way and fire a bunch of employees. And famously now he emailed employees a few weeks back and said you either need to be hardcore or leave. And in fact, the term hardcore has led to an office meme for us in my day job, where I keep asking people if they're hardcore or not. The bottom line is that there's a lot going on there, and I think the implication for education is that there, Twitter in a world where there aren't protections in place becomes a pretty scary place, I think. And I just think about in the last 15 years where Twitter has grown from and what it's become. I'm reminded of two things. I know plenty of teachers that actually, government teachers actually, that have students get on Twitter and utilize as an exercise to engage with elected officials and research and kind of see what's going on in regards to the broader political realm. But also, teacher Twitter is a real thing, right? And it brought me in not because of the prospect of connecting with celebrities or politicians or even tech companies. What brought me to Twitter was the prospect of connecting with other educators. And I've actually seen references before to the fact that Twitter, despite the fact it's not the most popular social media site in the United States by a far margin, actually, sites like Instagram and Facebook, and even in Facebook's current state, and also up and comers like TikTok, I think have more aggregate audience than does Twitter. But Twitter's experience is pretty good when it comes to connecting to people professionally. Now, one thing that I think has been really clear, in this is just as true now as it was 10 years ago. And Wes, I think you and I have talked about this a couple of times in the history of our podcast, but Twitter is a great place to connect and share bits of information. It is not a place to have a nuanced discussion about things. And what I've discovered over time is that the more nuance you need to your discussion, the less likely it is you're going to have a productive discussion on Twitter. I've been in a couple of regular weekly edu chats with folks where the topic was a bit controversial and lacked a certain bit of nuance. And when you try to express an opinion that is more complex, but perhaps goes against the norm, Twitter's just a terrible place to do that. And but that said, if Twitter dies, I don't think it's going to, but if Twitter dies, I think that's the biggest loss for education, is that it's just an incredibly important platform, I think, for teachers, particularly teachers with any sort of tech acumen, to connect. Now, that all said, I uh, I've been quietly watching things as they play out. I am concerned because they let a lot of potentially destructive voices back onto the platform, and in a lot of ways. The vision of free speech for Mr. Musk is not the way I think free speech works, at least in regards to the American democracy. But I'm not sure if Mastodon is the place to go either, in part because it's a little difficult to set up. It's not quite it's not as polished of a platform as Facebook or Twitter. It's harder to find people that are out there because if someone else, a friend of yours, is following someone there and they're on another Mastodon server, it's easy to find them. But if I want to find, you know, Melissa Mastodon user, and I don't know which server that she's on unless I'm able to find someone that's following her or search of users, or I think there's been some fledgling directories that have started popping up. It's difficult to find people, so discovery I think is difficult. And also, when you see a generic feed, you see your server. And if you're on a quiet server or maybe a very protective server, you're not going to see as much of the broader conversation. There's a lot that's going to happen, I think, in the next couple of months in regards to Twitter. The article I shared was, I don't think we actually talked about this situation the last time we met a month ago, but one of the things that happened was, and I think we did report on this last time around, was that Elon Musk was going to sell check marks for $8 a month. That was one of the ways he was going to get income, and that would be a way of confirming, verifying you. And the process of verification is, at least was, a little bit in a black box, right? That, I know that both Wes and I have talked about that we've tried to get verified before. Wes has a much better argument than I do because I think he's got 5 times the followers that I do, and I think that makes a little more sense. But outside of celebrities, some unique use cases, some technology leaders, and then politicians and official accounts, Twitter verification has been generally unable to be picked up by the average user, even if it's useful to know that you're the real you and not someone else. And so Mr. Musk quickly implemented a solution that allows you to get verification for $8 a month. And what immediately happened, and it's detailed in some detail in the New York Times article I share from November 11th, is that a bunch of people got on and created fake accounts that were verified with $8 and started creating shenanigans. Probably the one that I laughed the most at, but also it's very serious, is one of the makers of insulin in the United States was the target of a fake verified account saying that they were going to drastically decrease the price of insulin because it's the right thing to do, and mentioned the fact that the patent for insulin was sold for $1 when it was created decades ago for a reason. And the company immediately, not immediately, after several hours, the company figured out what was happening, sent out a tweet saying that the tweet was not from them. It was not an official tweet. It was not anything to do with the company. And then the company lost several percentage points of stock value because of that. And of course, the uncomfortable conversation that led to is that I think it was Eli Lilly that was the company that was targeted in that kind of spoof. But Eli Lilly apologized for the tweet, and then a bunch of advocates for diabetics that need insulin, which is just crazy expensive in the United States, then said, well, glad to hear that you're apologizing for a hack tweet and not for the price of insulin, which led to a whole nother set of debates. And there's just so many rabbit holes here: identity, source verification, parody. I think is something that is brought up by all this too. And there's gonna be another version of this released relatively soon. I think I saw maybe in a week or two some version of this after they turned it off because of all the shenanigans. But Maybe this is where Twitter's going in the future. Maybe the Twitter that emerges from this is a leaner, better Twitter, maybe more responsive to its users. It's hard to know and say, but man, this is just an epic mess.
Several thoughts. First off, I dropped the article into the show notes, and let's see. Shoot, I'm gonna try to copy this as a gift link. It's interesting because this is hate speech rise on Twitter is unprecedented. Researchers find, and this is the New York Times on December the 2nd. I like, since I subscribe to the New York Times, being able to share these links as gift links, and that way you don't have to worry about getting the prompt in order to subscribe. What occurs to me, and we've talked about this before, is that I think both you and I have really lived on a part of Twitter, edu-Twitter, that is very different than what the mainstream media talks about and what a lot of people wring their hands and lament. My experiences since 2007 getting on Twitter have been exceptionally positive. I have fortunately not really bore the brunt or been at the receiving end of a culture war diatribe of trolls of just a lot of ugliness. And there is a lot of ugliness on Twitter. There's a lot of harassment that happens, and that is related actually to the issue of verification. But there's also been a lot of unintended consequences, or I think they're unintended, in terms of like the ways in which social media, not just Twitter, has been weaponized globally, especially by, in some cases, politicians who have really been able to pull the emotional strings, so to speak, of people, really fan the flames of fear. And we've seen things happen in the Rohingya minority, the Rohingya people in Southeast Asia, in Brazil, with Bolsonaro. We saw things with Brexit. We saw things in the 2016 election here in the United States. I dropped in also, in addition to that article, and I was thinking about Geek of the Week or whatever, but I'm just going to say this now. I'll give you this Mastodon link. So this guy, Adam McKay, is phenomenal. What I want to say is that, Twitter and sort of the mainstream Twitter experience may be really bad. And that could end up causing, like, if Twitter doesn't make money, if advertisers do flee en masse, and Twitter, because I think Elon has to make something like, is it $1 billion? What is it, $1 billion a year, maybe, or is it a month? Maybe it's a year.
Well, yeah, whatever it is. I mean, he paid $41 billion for the platform.
It's a lot of interest, right? And so interest alone on what he leveraged. And I won't pretend to understand all the dynamics of that investment, but there's a lot of money that has to be made in order for the folks who have given loans to get their money back. So anyway, there is a scenario where Twitter doesn't, get to live forever, but I don't think that's going to happen quickly if Twitter does go away. And I think that the good experiences, which I'm continuing to have, and I think you are too, with Twitter, and I've invested countless hours in building my lists. I mean, I use my Twitter lists all the time, and it really pains me. And Mastodon doesn't have public lists. You can build a list, but it's private to you. Anyway, I dropped in this link, and this is an exchange with a artist who has been using this tool called Midjourney, which is similar to Stable Diffusion, which is the open sourced version of an text to image AI algorithm, which is called generative AI, which is maybe this will segue us into our AI conversation. Anyway, if you scroll down this, it was an amazing, set of pictures that this artist, Adam McKay, had created of this astronaut playing this guitar on the moon. And I asked him about, hey, what are you using? And he says Midjourney. And then one of my sixth graders actually discovered that Padlet, which we license at school to use as like digital sticky notes, it's a wonderful platform. It has a I can't draw option that uses generative AI to create images based upon your query. And so I had a student that did one for shark chasing cheetah. And then this artist Adam McKay uses Midjourney, which uses Discord, interestingly, to create these other images, which were incredible. And so anyway, it led to this back and forth, and me, ending up playing with Midjourney a little bit, and some of the articles that I'll end up sharing when we get to that AI conversation. So wonderful, exciting conversations that are able to be had between, in this case, strangers or people who were strangers before. The use of hashtags, it is more challenging, but I think the key is Mastodon is not based on the whole idea of surveillance capitalism and the attention. The attention economy plays in, but surveillance capitalism, which says we're the product, we're not the customer as the users. The customers are the folks who are buying ads, and the whole purpose is to try and hack our brains to get us to just spend more time on the platform. So I think it really is likely that Twitter is going to continue to be a wonderful resource for many of us, as it has been, and it's grown to be for years. But I think that the potential for Twitter to get really, really ugly is really, really strong. And so the other link that I'm going to drop in here is to a podcast that I would commend, which I think I did find via Twitter, for several reasons. I will not at all pretend to be an expert on Black Twitter, on the ways in which African Americans have found community and support and networking. But there is a African American podcaster by the name of Bridget Todd, who has partnered together with another African American journalist, I think, to create Internet Hate Machine. And so they have an episode called, it says, what Elon Musk could learn from the End Father's Day hoax, which I'd never heard of before. But anyway, this is on the Internet Hate Machine podcast, which Bridget Todd hosts. And anyway, among other things, they talk about how vital verification is for people whose identities are being stolen. In some cases, and this has happened politically, there have been cases, and I'm not going to be, it's in this podcast, but there was a case where this account that was pretending to be Antifa, was a pro Donald Trump account, and it was saying some extremely inflammatory things. And they had grabbed a picture of a real African American journalist. Well, you can see where things get really ugly really fast when people's identities are being hijacked by fake accounts. And there's a story in here of an actor who I did not know, but he had received messages from parents being mad at him because their children had been interacting with him. He wasn't even on Twitter at that time. And it just showed what a dumpster fire it can be when people are interacting with accounts that they think are legitimate, or people's identities are being stolen. And it is a real mess. And so what I walked away from listening to that Internet Hate Machine episode saying was, wow, even though, to your point, Jason, it seemed like a bit of a black box as far as how verification worked, and like, why can't we get verified? But for some of the folks, like celebrities or like journalists in general, or specifically African Americans, it has been very, very important in terms of trying to establish credibility and authenticity, and just dealing with the incredibly fractured and polluted and frankly hostile information environment that we live in. So I think that the forecast, sadly, is for more pollution, more dumpster fire, more confusion. Like, I don't think any of the changes that have been made to Twitter recently are going to be constructive and helpful in really helping anyone other than trolls and people that really want to be more free as bad actors to do nefarious things. And so I'm sorry to bring that forecast, but that's my reading of the tea leaves at this point.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I would just say, and you mentioned something at the beginning of your comments, Wes, that I want to add a little deeper note for me. My experience in Twitter is better, but I've also had to work at that a little bit because politics wiggles its way into my feed. And I don't run a political feed. And in fact, if anything, I'm very careful about my social media presence, and it's not just because I have a leadership position in a statewide organization in my state. It's not just because when social media started, 20 years ago, I was a classroom teacher, and so I was really careful about that. But and Wes can confirm this. You see a very polished version of my life in Facebook and on Instagram. It's a very curated set of photos. I don't ring through my problems on Facebook. I don't overshare at all. If I have challenges, I'm not afraid to talk about them. And in fact, one of the reasons why we've been gone for a couple of weeks is I finally picked up COVID a couple of weeks ago, and obviously I'm here and doing great, and feel very thankful about modern medicine. But that's a very curated version of my life. And in fact, Twitter, the way I engage with is also very curated. I want to learn about more about Google Classroom and what new strategies are utilized in Excel, and connect with folks like Wes. And when politics gets into my feed, or when I find out there's some kind of terrible thing going on discussion wise on Twitter, I click on it, and it's very jarring to me, because my experience is mostly related to education and connecting with other professional educators and people that care deeply about that issue. And that's a very different experience. And I've had a lot of ideas cooking in my head the last couple of months, and one of them is that part of the reason why these social media properties have been so out of control in the last 15 years or so, obviously kind of crescendoing in the mid 2010s, is because I just don't think we've embraced enough of these technologies in the classroom and helped kids understand the ways to use them appropriately. And I have a whole I should note, I am going to keynote the Northwest Council for Computer Education conference later this spring. I'll be the closing keynote for that. And I've been working really hard on some kind of theory. I have an idea in my head that I've been working on that is pretty extraordinary. But the one of the themes I'm working on is that that all educators need to take responsibility for how students use technology. And it may not be our job, but in absence of someone doing that for us, I think we're sending kids into the world. And I'm not talking to probably the people you're listening to this podcast. I'm certainly not talking to Dr. Fryer. I'm probably not talking to most of the people of the audience of the Northwest Council for Computer Education conference, right? But we need to have an honest conversation in education about where we're going and what we're responsible for, because I'm of a significant view that unless we help people find the good in these tools, then I think the less better angels of our nature are going to take over instead. And that's what I think we're seeing now. Mr. Musk, there's lots to admire about him. There's lots also to be critical about him. But I've seen a couple references to this. You have to have systems in place to make sure that your social media property doesn't become a dark alley somewhere full of cruft. And that's what I fear is happening right now. So.
Well, and this can segue to AI if we want to. I think that both exist simultaneously. We've got a wonderful opportunity to engage in great conversations and dialogue. And like you said, it is more difficult if we want to disagree as far as just the format and the medium of Twitter. But it is a great place for idea sharing and for networking and just also just feedback and say, hey, once you have a network, throwing something out there, and oftentimes you'll hear from somebody.
Yeah.
And they'll share something that you haven't heard of before. It really is, fantastic for that. But I think edgy Twitter has coexisted with ugly Twitter for quite a while, and ugly Twitter is still there, and maybe it's going to get uglier. So I think that, like you said, we have a responsibility as educators to be literate in the tools and the platforms of the day. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to be on every platform and that everyone needs to be a creator on everyone, but I have known some very significant administrators, for instance, who I will not name, who have absolutely refused any kind of use of social media at all. And I respect people's choices. And I actually think that this holiday, and I'll say, I'm saying this on the show, so I'll commit. I'm going to go do a bit of a cleanse from my phone. I have a wonderful, wonderful colleague who's challenging me in a lot of ways. And there's is it Cal Thomas? There's Deep Work. Have you read that book before?
That's funny because it's sitting in my Kindle as one that I would like to go in a little deeper into.
So Cal Newport is the author of Deep Work. Haven't read it yet, but I have some other friends who've read that. Anyway, just this idea of like literally putting my phone in a drawer and turning it off, and not picking it up for a couple days. Like, I'm going to try that. And other than going camping, before the pandemic, I really haven't had that experience. So anyway, I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to pass judgment on anybody's decisions that you make about social media and about devices, et cetera. But I will say, I think that as we are educating students and as we are attempting to help develop citizens who are going to have the skills needed to not only navigate with success the needs of living and buying and networking, getting a job, but also helping shape our society, being constructive voices in conversations, which hopefully involve listening and not just yelling and shouting, like utilizing social media tools, being careful, especially when we get around issues that can be used as wedge issues and can certainly be political hot potatoes, being careful, but at the same time, being thoughtfully engaged and not remaining silent, especially when really bad things sometimes are happening. So
I have one final comment about Twitter. It's very quick, Wes. You and I would not be friends right now without Twitter. And
that's right.
And part of it is because like I would have never walked up to you at a conference and said, "Hey, is your name Wes? I think I read your blog." Like, that's not the guy I am. I'm way more socially awkward than that, and way more shy than that. But the bottom line is that you and I've maintained an almost 10-year friendship now, and we spend an hour a week hanging out together.
Yeah,
this might as well be called Coffee with Jason and Wes, right? Because that's kind of what we're doing, is talking through stuff every week. That's minus Twitter, it's a very powerful platform. I hope for our sake, but also the sake for education Twitter, that Mr. Musk figures it out.
Well, the good news is we're going to be able to continue to utilize these tools to make connections and to make transformative connections. And turn this into a full kumbaya moment. Jason, you are one of my best friends. And I treasure the fact that we have this opportunity, right? I mean, I've really missed our weekly meetings. And it was thanks to some wonderful friends and fellow educators that we know in Montana that I got to go up there a few times actually to do some presentations. I think there was a Willie Nelson concert in there somewhere. My dad was up there. There was some different things that happened. But I mean, and this is one of the things that's always really excited me the most about using these tools is transformation, right? Being able to have a conversation, read a book, even just encounter an idea that I wouldn't have encountered if it wasn't for, this tool, this platform, this interactive medium. And I think that still is not as common among educators as it could be. And again, everyone's going to have different choices, and everybody's got, a different comfort zone when it comes to using tools and sharing and all of that. But I will say, and this is very, very positive, that I think the constructive potential of these interactive tools to help us as educators network and connect and, find inspiration, find help, be supported, like those things are super, super important. And I don't see Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg having a monopoly on all of that potential. I think that, the internet and the World Wide Web specifically, I guess, writ large, running over the internet, it still has just fantastic potential for us to do that. And the communities are different, and when you start to get more and more folks, the dynamics change a little bit. And we saw that happen, in the beginning with Web 2.0, and there was just a lot of idealism. But why don't we segue to some AI, because there's some crazy stuff happening. And I've been actually experimenting with some stuff with kids. I think you've been doing some experimentation too.
I have.
Where would you like to start our little AI? Because we're about or just a little over halfway through the show.
Yeah, which and how Twitter just sucked up that much oxygen in our conversation maybe just tells you what we're thinking about that. So this is probably multiple episodes of conversations. And I also think that this conversation has been coming for a long time in education, but it's really coming to a head now. And but in the last couple of weeks, several things have popped up. One of them was the release of Chat GPT version 4, which is, we mentioned the open chat bot. It was probably 2 or 3 months ago. And I think it was version 2 or 3 of that. But GPT is an open source platform that is available for dialogue. So you can just go to openai.com, and then go to their chat bot, which is this chat GPT. And version 4 of this was released last week, and it was stunning in that you can have a pretty good conversation with a chat bot. Now, chat bots aren't anything new, and I was just trying to remember. Jarvis, I think, was the name of the one from 30 years ago, where you could start chatting with them. There was also a chat therapist that was available as shareware. There's a term hasn't been around for a while, 35 years ago, that you can install on your Windows 3.1 PC. And there's all sorts of interesting bits and bytes that's been around that. But the OpenAI is a platform that's been built into a ton of interesting tools, and those tools are starting to become widely available and have themselves become viral. So, as an example of this, there has been an app that is made by a company that you're probably familiar with. The company is the company that made Prisma. Prisma is a filter app that has hundreds of pretty great filters. It's been around for some time. I think it was 2016 when Prisma became a big deal. If you went to the Prisma app, you know what I'm talking about because you've seen photos with this filter on them. But the Prisma company made something called Lensa, which is an AI-based photo editor that's pretty good. And then they added a functionality last week that allows you to make what's called magic avatars. Now, Lensa costs money, and then magic avatars also cost you money. I managed to get a 7-day free trial. I then paid $7 twice. And over the weekend, when traveling home, I created 400 avatars based on my face. And what I did was that I started off with the first the first 20 photos I could find on my phone that looked in any way like me, right? And it created a bunch of avatars that are interesting, but I'll be very frank, 20 or 30 of them are pretty good, and they all kind of look like me. But the problem with those avatars was that I have a second chin because I'm kind of a robust shaped dude, and it would extra focus on my extra chin. But the one where it didn't matter was it created a photo of me as a much, much older man, completely gray, long flowing beard, very
Father time.
very wise looking. And I texted my wife and said, oh, well, this is very deity looking. And she says, no, you look like Father Time. And so this image came out of that. And then
or Gandalf the Grey. I think you need a staff, with a crystal on it, and
and some flowing robes.
Thou shall not pass.
And then I posted a smart alecky social media post that I recently accepted a new position as Father Time. So, but then after that, because I was a little tired of the extra chin, and here's an example of an extra chin photo where it extenuated my extra chin because it doesn't need any help on its own. I went and very selectively picked 20 photos. And I had to go back in the archives a little bit. And some of these have a little bit of extra chinage on it too, but they say that it never generates the same ones twice. But these are a little more probably not palatable because I'm not embarrassed by my second chin. It's just not something I want to highlight, which is what the previous AI was doing. So this has led to a shocking amount of discussion because, by the way, the reason why they charge $7 for this service is what Lensa says is that it takes a shocking amount of computer power to generate, 200 images based on 20 images. But there's all sorts of articles related to this. There's a blog post on Hyper Allergic on December 6th that talks about how there's a lot of issues there. There's accusations of racism because of it. It tends to play into stereotypes. And to be honest, obviously very different for me, but the necessity of the fact that you didn't like its results because it kind of categorized me as a big guy and then started like extenuating big guy stuff. I kind of know what maybe it's talking about. And there's another article from TechCrunch that talks about how artists are super pissed about this. I've actually seen both attitudes, but a lot of people are talking about how the OpenAI platform sucked in large numbers of images, billions of images likely, that from all sorts of databases, from Flickr to stock photo sites to just image searches. And a lot of those contained copyrighted images that are played upon in the AI part itself. So as an example of this, I'm pretty sure that there's no commercial or that there are free images that are open source for this, but this is Jason as astronaut. It's pretty legit, right? Like that looks like
That's nice.
yeah,
That's
and
good.
and it's kind of cool that it
That's
makes
with Lenza again?
yeah, that's with Lenza again. And there's a couple like this. That's Jason as
That's
astronaut.
awesome. Oh
Yeah,
my gosh, that's awesome.
well, and that's exactly the point, right? Like it's silly, but it does a pretty good job, right? Now, I was talking to my wife about this, and we were talking about my two versions of the data sets, the kind of svelter Jason versus the kind of double chin Jason, and she said that in her world, and she's a light social media user, a lot of women are talking about that if you are a larger woman, that it just can't give you something that isn't exaggerated. And I feel that, right? Because as a larger gentleman myself, the first set seemed awfully hell-bent on kind of reminding the eye that I am not small. And there's lots here, right? So I guess I'll just start with that. Wes, any thoughts about what we've talked about so far in regards to this?
We need to get together more often and talk because there's so much to this. So these are probably going to be continued. Number one, the Chat GPT right now is free, and I just actually signed up. It will not be free forever.
Yeah.
So a number of these generative AI platforms, which are like Dolly, which is from OpenAI as well, Stable Diffusion, which has been open sourced but is being modified in different places. Mid Journey, these are being monetized, and Stable Diffusion has been open source for about 2 months, and it's incredible to see the explosion of what is happening. To your point about the artist being upset, I want to share this article from MIT Tech Review on September 16th. It's titled, "This Artist is Dominating AI Generated Art, and He's Not Happy About It." And when I get to my Geek of the Week, which is a podcast, that's how I learned about this article. This is like Harry Potter land. Okay, generative AI is I type in some words and boom, I see a picture. And I'm not going to share the link to the Padlet because right now it's open and anybody could put anything. But my kids we've probably created hundreds of these in the last week in Padlet. It's a bit, I actually sent a letter and a video home to parents last week because one of the tools, Mid Journey, uses Discord, and that is not a friendly, it's a potentially dangerous chat app, especially for younger kids. Anyway, and I've got, and there are kids that are gamers that are on Discord anyway. So there's a lot of different, issues around this. But the reason this is like Harry Potter is Greg Rakowski is a fantasy artist who really is like Lord of the Rings, Dungeons and Dragons. If you go to that link I put in the show notes, like pretty incredible fantasy images. Well, his name is more popular than Picasso or any other phrase because what people have discovered, and thanks to Reddit and Twitter and social media and whatever, if you simply put his name in the query, suddenly you get phenomenal results. And that article has some examples of this. And so there's really, really interesting and important connections to intellectual property. Your point about how many images have been ingested by these AIs. This reminds, we've talked on the show before about Clearview AI, and I put that link into the chat and I'll keep it in the show notes. This is a database of thousands and thousands of faces that have been scraped against the terms of service of these different platforms, but it has created this system that many law enforcement agencies across the United States, and I don't know, perhaps internationally, but certainly in the United States, are using, and can supposedly get pretty good results of just, hey, here's a security camera shot, who is this, and it tells you. But as you were mentioning earlier, there's all kinds of problems, especially because these systems have not tended to be trained on as many people of color, and it is not working as well for African Americans and for others. And so there's just a lot of issues that are around it. And then the other thing that I got to say is this article by The Atlantic. I read this last night. This is from December 6th. It's called "The College Essay is Dead. Nobody is prepared for how AI will transform academia." And I'm actually going to send this to my principal and just offer, I don't know, we don't have a faculty meeting until next year. But like sharing this, we've had hints of AI making an impact, but the tools that are now available, and I think this Chat GPT and engines that are built on it, it's so good. We're talking about master's level essays and writing that you can then refine again with your query, with the way that you're asking for things. But we're not talking about something that's just been copied off the web and plagiarized like some of my wife's fifth graders have done recently. And I helped her and I said, honey, I don't think a fifth grader wrote that. Let's Google that. Oh, look, there's the exact page. And then, there's the whole essay. It's on the first page of Google results. It's not hard to find. With this generative stuff, we're talking about actually new phrases, new paragraphs, new sentences, and it's pretty good. And so these articles, and we're not going to get to all of them that we even have in tonight's show notes, it's not quite human, and it still requires there to be some human creativity in terms of like, what are you going to say and put into it. But what this article in The Atlantic says is that in the humanities specifically, and this is in schools sort of writ large, we have used the essay as this huge part of the assessment process of seeing whether or not students have learned, and giving students now an assessment which cannot be gamed through one of these generative AI tools has suddenly in the last month become a really, really big deal, because these tools are more accessible than ever before, and they're incredibly powerful in what they can do.
Yeah, totally. Well, and to your point, it's funny because a lot of these AI-based writing apps have crossed my radar in the last month, and I've been doing demos with my staff on it just because, what you mentioned, Wes, about this notion of the whole essay going away. I think it's enormously problematic for a variety of reasons, because I think writing and speaking, for that matter, are really important intellectual tools for building capacity inside your head, right? But that said, though, I've been playing with one called Lex. It's at lex.page, and it has a unique piece to it in that it doesn't generate something per se, but if you get stuck, all you need to do is type in 3 pluses and it will continue to write on your behalf. And so, as an example of this, I copy and pasted 5 paragraphs from my dissertation into it, and then went to paragraph number 6, plus, plus, plus. Not only did it write a pretty legit next paragraph, it also added citations to it, right? I haven't looked to see if those citations are real or not. They could have been just generated citations to look like citations, But sweet mother of Troy, is that a mind-blowing idea and concept? And I will also note too that I typed in one paragraph about my program, mentioning it by name, and then went plus 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 and twice, and it wrote two more paragraphs. The paragraphs weren't accurate, but they sounded right. And it utilized a lot of knowledge that, unless you knew about my program, it would be it would be ridiculous to just make this up based on the fact that I run an online program, right? I There's a lot of discussions here. I will tell you, I do think that there's a lot of folks in academia that absolutely have their heads in the sand about this. And in fact, I've been witnessing a discussion on the professor subreddit, which is an interesting place to go. It can sometimes get a little discouraging, but someone posted up with citations this notion that we're never going to have to worry about AI in regards to this. And first of all, the citations were from 2018, so that itself tells you maybe they don't get it. But a lot of professors were, I guess, or at least I should say, folks in the subreddit, who knows if they're actually professors or not, put in quite a bit of uh, like, I'm glad to hear, and I don't want to try to figure out what's AI generated and what's not. But the bottom line is that it's pretty scary. And by the way, all these chatbots and the tools that are built on top of them, I've tried everything, and usually it can provide a pretty good, I'm not saying this is going to be an A+ essay, but what are the 3 reasons why the South lost the Civil War? That's an example prompt I use all the time, and it comes up with things that are pretty legitimate, right? And maybe college professors don't have to worry about this for a while, but middle school teachers do, right? Because that's the level of writing that I would say it's roughly akin to, or early high school.
Well, and this Atlantic article is talking about master's level, like,
Yeah.
this is where we're getting a taste of the power of AI. I've read and heard and watched videos that talk about how, in the not too distant future, for instance, doctors are going to be augmented with AIs that are going to have comprehensively read every single research article that remotely touches on whatever particular, ailment and symptom and situation that a patient is in. And it's just a bit startling, I think, to encounter this in such a, it's not fully fleshed out in terms of like it's perfect. It's not, but it's so good right now. And the pace of this is to only get better. And so I think that, and it'll be interesting to see if at NCCE you've got some sessions about this. I think this is a really, really important topic for us all to talk about, because, I mean, writing is so important. And my wife and I were talking about this today. I'm having my kids write scripts for their culminating video project for the Fruit Loop conspiracy theory about the moon landings and SIFT, and using that as a web literacy framework and all that stuff. It's hard, man. It's challenging. It's hard to get kids to do writing. It's hard to help them do high quality writing. And she's, has struggles with her 5th graders as well. But it's so important, and we've got to find more ways to write. But with these tools, it really, I don't know, maybe we're going to end up handing kids a crayon and, a tablet of paper, and just say, okay, you got to just do this here in class in front of me, and I'm going to watch you. I don't know. I'm not sure what this is going to mean, but it is going to, it's not going to be a hypothetical. It's today, and students already, and we haven't exhaustively covered these tools, but our daughter, who's now 19, has a very good working knowledge of mathematical tools, which can show you your steps as well. And we're talking about higher level, I think, trigonometry and calculus. We're not just talking about basic arithmetic. So the application of these tools to repetitive kinds of tasks and things which can be automated, that's not even half of it, because what we're talking about with this essay writing and this generative AI with images is literal, like, imagination and creativity and synthesis of ideas. and things that, again, the Turing test. I don't know if we mentioned that on the show before or recently, but that's Alan Turing's test is to say, look, if you're separated with a wall and you don't know if you're interacting with a robot or a human, the intelligence test, the Turing test is you can't tell, and that machine has tricked you because you've been asking it questions and it's been answering and you can't tell. And I think that this AI ChatGPT is getting close to that. And hopefully they figured out a way to not have it become sort of a horrible, nasty troll, because that's happened before with Microsoft chatbots and other things in the past.
Yep, coming to a school near you, for better or for worse. So Wes, somehow we just let two topics suck up the entire hour. I will say there's more to come, I think, on this AI topic, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this in future weeks. But I do think if you're a teacher, and I would experiment with this, not because it's an issue now, although I think it is an issue now in some classrooms. But you're right, Wes. Like, even if you don't think it's a threat now, it will be a threat to something. Threat is not necessarily a negative thing. Threat if there's an unpalatable status quo that's being threatened by something, that's a different thing altogether. But yeah, definitely coming to an app near you.
Let's do a couple quick hits. We've got a whole bunch of other articles. Do you want to do just a few more, or you want to go to Geek of the Week and kind of wind down?
No, let's. This one's a fun play with thing too. There's a great article from The Verge November 18th that the FCC has released their U.S. broadband map, and I put a link to the FCC broadband map in our show notes. So again, edtechsr.com/link. And I think this is a useful exercise to go through this. Basically, the FCC has been working on and taking reports from people, by the way, in regards to what internet providers are available to you, and the providers themselves, are featured by address now, which is the first time this has ever been available. It's an incredibly useful consumer tool. But you type your address in, and it tells you which providers are available to you. And as I am not surprised at all, when I type in my personal address in beautiful Missoula, Montana, the results are about what I was expecting. And the reason why I went ahead and typed in my information is because I was curious to see the DSL provider in my neighborhood keeps sending me emails and mail pieces telling me that fiber is available in my neighborhood. And every time I go and look at, and I'd be interested in a little bit of fiber in my neighborhood. And every time I go to find out more about it, it tells me there's only a 1.5 megabit connection available, which is, I'm pretty sure the connection I had back in 1998. So it's not very good, as it turns out. And one of the things that I think is pretty extraordinary about this is that it puts a lot of information in consumers' hands. And by the way, the DSL provider is not even listed at my home, so they don't even acknowledge that my neighborhood has access to that. I've looked, it's pretty accurate, at least in the 3 or 4 addresses that I'm available to check, that I know for sure what's there. And the FCC wants you to challenge this. If a company's claiming that you have access available and they won't come to your address, they won't return your phone call, or the speed is lower than they're advertising here, they ask you to submit proof of that, and they'll investigate into it to create an accurate map. So wonderful consumer tool.
Fantastic. Okay. You put an article about this too. This is Ars Technica, December 6th. Stalkers chilling use of AirTags spurs class action lawsuit against Apple. This is a pretty big deal. We've talked about AirTags. We talked about the wonder and, benefit of AirTags, especially traveling, putting them in your bags. But this article, which again is a class action lawsuit, covers anyone in the United States who owns either an iOS or an Android device. And there's just been all kinds of police reports through the years, ever since AirTags came out in 2021, about the ways in which they have been used to stalk people and in real harmful ways. And so, again, this is like the two-sided face of technology. A really powerful tool like this is going to, unfortunately, be able to be used by bad actors, as it's going to be able to be used by folks that want to do good things. You want to do another one, and I'll do one, and then we probably better.
Yeah. By the way, I did travel with AirTags in the last couple of weeks, and they're still absolutely delightful for travel. Here's a quick one that is just, I think, good news. Google has released its 2022 report of its top search terms. I'm delighted to report it's not the Queen dying. It's not Ukraine. It's not Elon Musk and Twitter. The top search in 2022 is the word Wordle. So I'm glad to see that we together care more about distracting word games than we are about the issues of the day. And I think that's actually pretty good news about our culture.
And there's so many other good articles that I want to get to. So the good news is, folks, the rumor is that we will be back next week. So, wow. Okay. It's been too long.
It has been too long, but I think that's a message for us for the future. So
it is. All right. Geeks of the week. I'll go fast. Two. One that I'm going to be just say kind of quietly, if I can do that. The first one is awesome. This is a podcast called The Fork Podcast from October 21st. It is from at least one New York Times columnist. They both might be. It's entitled "Generative AI is Here. Who Should Control It?" And I don't think that I have shared this because it's been a while since we were talking, but I had a chance to hear a person who's pretty high up at OpenAI talk at our school. Did I tell you about this on the show, Jason?
Say it again.
An employee of OpenAI came and presented at our school for our kids. Yeah, and I need to post about it. Anyway, that's how I learned that OpenAI is not and it did not want to open source their tools. They're not doing that, but this hedge fund investor person has done that, and that's where Stable Diffusion came from. And so his name is Imad Mustaq, and this is a fantastic interview. And there's so much here in terms of this idea that we shouldn't have AI controlled by a few people, and or should we want to wait because it's so powerful and not just release it and just see what happens? But he's decided to just open source it and see what happens. And there's some crazy things that can happen. So anyway, that's a fantastic, fantastic podcast. And then I can't really say this quietly because I'm going to say it and it's going to be, text to speech, whatever. It's going to be, we had some attacks on our power grid here in North Carolina this week. I've made a wakelet that's unlisted right now, and I've added to it. And I think I'm going to write a blog post about this called Culture War Meets Power Grid. But anyway, there's some fairly alarming stuff here. This was a targeted attack, and they do not know at this point, or they haven't said publicly who did it, but there's an intersection with white supremacy, with right-wing militia groups, with former military officers that led groups to Washington, D.C. for January 6th. And there's power still out, just outside Fayetteville, about an hour and a half east of where we are. It took power out for about 50,000 users. People took firearms and knew what they were doing and took out part of these two different substations that coincidentally took out power at a drag show that was happening that people were really mad about and had posted on social media about. So there's a lot of intersections of different issues. But Wakelet, it's a great tool. And you can also have unlisted Wakelet links, which obviously now it's going to be available on our show notes. But that's a pretty interesting and important set of dynamics that actually in the Pacific Northwest you've seen as well in Oregon and Washington. And there's some articles in there that cite some of those attacks, which haven't just been against the power grid. They've also been against internet and fiber connections and things like that have been targeted attacks that we don't know exactly who did those. Kind of a downer, but I'm sure you're going to have something more positive for us to finish up with.
I am going to have something more positive for you, Wes. We've often talked about Swappa on the program, which is a place that both Wes and I have utilized to buy used technology. Most recently, I bought a new to her iPhone for my wife, who didn't want a brand new phone, but we upgraded her to an iPhone 13 and paid almost half the price, no, less than half the price than we would have paid for it new. And it turned out that the phone itself it had 100% battery health on it, which meant for all practical purposes it's gonna last her for a while. But there's another one available that's very Swappa-like. It tends to work more with larger refurbishing firms as opposed to individuals. But I've had a couple good experiences on it the last couple of months, helping out family. It's called backmarket.com. And the prices are competitive. And I did do some research to see what other people perceived about Back Market, and it's listed as a viable Swappa alternative by a lot of writers that have bought from both. So if you're looking for devices, and especially if you have a very specific device you're looking for and you want to get at a certain price level, I keep both Back Market and Swappa now in the background so that I can utilize it as a potential place to buy used devices. So that's backmarket.com.
Do we want to do a holiday show, by the way? We've done one or do we just want to maybe include some things next show and some
Let's include some things next show. I've got some ideas and things that I would buy stocking stuffer wise if I were buying tech for folks.
Good. Okay, cool.
Well, Dr. Fryer, where can people find you on the internet? And I guess we have to start talking about Mastodon too, right?
That's right. Well, just go to wesfryer.com/after, and you could link to all my places, which includes Mastodon. But Twitter is still the best place probably, and that's W Fryer. How about you?
Awesome. I am on Mastodon at Neiffer, which is on mastodon.cloud. I have no better way of describing that. And then I'm also still on Twitter, I guess. In fact, I haven't decreased my usage of it at all. I guess a shout out to Mr. Musk. But Tech Savvy Teach is my moniker on Twitter. So this here, though, is the EdTech Situation where they're once a week podcast, sometimes a once a month podcast, but we'll be back to once a week starting next week again, where we talk about educational technology. We hope you join us live. We have an opportunity to reach out to audiences live on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, somewhere in the middle of the night UTC, if you happen to be in Western Europe. If you can't join us live, although we wish you would, find us anywhere finer podcasts are aggregated, or YouTube. EdTech SR has an active YouTube page where all of our archive videos go, along with Facebook. If people still use Facebook, Facebook has our live shows too, or you can go to our website, edtechsr.com, and download a tiny MP3. Thank you for joining us this week. Stay safe, stay savvy. We hope to see you next time on the EdTech Situation Room. Good night.
Do not pass go. Go download Lenza AI.